Hi, everyone, and welcome to another episode of BookGoodies Authors Podcast Series. I'm Deborah Carney, your host, and today I am joined by Ira Nayman, who is both a self-published author and an online author that has had a website up for, 10 years?
It will be 10 years old in September, yes.
That's awesome. So, Ira, why don't you introduce yourself and tell the people a little bit about yourself?
Okay. I have devoted my life to writing comedy. I decided that that's what I wanted to do when I was 8 years old. And I did it on and off as a teenager and into my early 20s, but I've been doing it pretty steadily since then. We have the website, Les Pages Folles. I've also published 3 books, collections of material that originally appeared on the website. They're a combination of science fiction and humor. The basic idea behind them is that there's this organization called the Alternate Reality News Service. They send reporters off into other dimensions, and then they come back and write news about what they find there.
That sounds cool.
Oh, thank you. People who have read some of the books describe it as a science fiction version of The Onion, if your listeners are familiar with that. I also have several short stories. I have a separate series of short stories about what happens in a world where all matter has become conscious at all levels of organization, from the smallest subatomic particle to galaxies and the whole universe.
Oh, wow.
And the main character is an object psychologist, so his job is to figure out the psychology of newly conscious objects. And they're a lot of fun. I've managed to place, 4 have appeared in science fiction and general anthologies, and I have 2 more coming up. Actually, I just found out within the last week. So that was pretty cool. And also, yes, I have a novel. It's called Welcome to the Multiverse, Sorry for the Inconvenience, and it will be published by Elsewhen Press in an electronic version later on in the year, and then in a print version early next year. So, pretty busy.
Yes, you're keeping busy. Now, you self-published your first set of books. What was your reasoning behind that? And it sounds like you maybe self-published them before Kindle and all those things, back when it was a little bit more difficult. Or why don't you tell me a little bit about those?
Sure. The first book, Alternate Reality, What It Used to Be, was published with iUniverse in 2008. The second book, What Were Once Miracles Are Now Children's Toys, was published with Eloquent Publishing in 2010. And the most recent book, Luna for the Loonies, was published early this year. And that one I did through Smashwords and CreateSpace.
Okay.
The reason for that was because, there were several. One, I was finding it difficult to get people to go to my website, which is a chronic thing when you've got, billions and billions of websites. Mm-hmm. And I thought having a physical book there would actually interest people more. People could get into the book, and then if they liked the book, they could go to my website and read so much more material.
Right.
But there was also the issue of reviews, right? People, there are a lot of review blogs now and just general reviewers who won't review anything electronic. It has to be in print.
Yeah.
So to get that kind of critical attention, I needed to have a print book to give them. And that actually worked out very well. The first book got 3 or 4 really positive reviews. The second book, several more. And so I've sort of been growing a critical base, if you will.
Well, and that's really important because you figured out who to reach out to, and if they liked your first book, you know how to, you can get them your second book and any subsequent things that you publish, because they'll add to your fan base, and then they'll bring their friends along, because as we all know, one of the things about books is, if you enjoy a book, you're going to tell everybody, and if you don't like a book, you're going to tell everybody.
That's exactly right. It's about small steps.
Yep.
Right? Getting part of the reason I should also mention part of the reason that it took me maybe 5 or 6 years of working on the website before I decided to publish anything in print was because it allowed me to experiment with my writing before I actually tried to go for a mainstream audience, which I think was very important. By the time I got the first book out, I was confident that I knew what I was doing. Right? I was confident that I was actually good enough to attract an audience.
Well, and that's really important because a lot of writers, they don't feel like their early writing has done anything for them, and like you said, you've been writing since you were 8. So, you have...
Yes, but nobody is ever going to see any of that.
Right, exactly. My son wrote his first book when he was 10, and he threw it away. And, but then he sat down and took a year to write another one, and finished it when he was 12, and he was more confident with that one. And it's the same thing with you. You get out, the important thing is to get out of your head and write it down. That's the most important thing, is to teach yourself that it's okay to just write it, whether it's good or not. I think that's probably what you were doing when you were 8, is you were just learning how to express yourself via the written word. Mm-hmm.
Exactly. And in my other life, I have a master's in communications, or master's in media studies, and a PhD in communications, and I've taught new media at universities. And one of the things that I tried to instill in my students was that as an artist, you have to be fearless. You have to go where your imagination takes you and write the things that most move you. And a lot of people, particularly early in their careers, are afraid of doing that. Will I offend people? Will it work? Will it...
Does it fit into what people are looking for? And like you said, you have to throw that all away and just realize that your voice is your voice, and it's no one else's voice, and you shouldn't try to sound like anyone else.
Oh, absolutely. I have to say, I would not say this for myself, but from 3 or 4 of the different reviewers that I've had have compared my writing to the writing of Douglas Adams.
Nice.
And I'm, of course, honored because I'm a big fan of Douglas Adams, and he was one of the influences on my writing, no question. But at the end of the day, I would prefer that people accepted my writing as my writing without necessarily comparing it to anybody else.
Right. But that happens. I mean, no matter who you are.
And I'm grateful that I get compared to such a great icon. Yes,
right.
No problem. I have no problem with that. The only thing is, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, you want to be known for your own thing. But as a photographer, I hear all the time, oh, your photographs look like art. They're so beautiful. And then you hear people in an art gallery and you hear, oh, these paintings are so beautiful. They look just like photographs. And I'm like, what do you want? Do you want photographs? Do you want paintings? What do you want? So it's the same kind of thing with, oh, he writes like in the style similar to Douglas Adams, but he has his own way of doing it. So, the more you write, a few years from now, someone will say, hey, you write like Ira Nayman writes.
I'd like to dare to think, yes.
Yeah. Well, your books sound very interesting, so I can't wait to go and take a look at them. Now, if someone were just starting out, what advice would you give them?
As I said, try to find your own voice. Try to find your own way. And don't worry too much about audience. I think that people give too much thought. Hold on, I'm getting feedback. I'm hearing my own voice.
All right, hang on. Let me turn this down. Is that better?
Okay. Yeah, that's much better. Thank you. I think, people give a lot of thought to who my audience is, and the problem is that if you try to please too many people, you end up losing your own voice. I think ultimately it takes longer to build an audience for something that's different, obviously, because, people, I do agree, I do understand that people want things that they're familiar with, want things they're comfortable with, and somebody with a truly unique, truly new voice obviously doesn't fit their convenient categories. But over the long haul, and you have to plan your career for 20, 30, maybe even 40 or 50 years, over the long haul, finding your unique voice will attract an audience. It's a kind of build it and they will come concept. So try to find that thing that is your unique interest and your unique way of saying it. That would be, my most important advice to a writer starting out.
That's awesome, because there's so many people, like you said, they're hesitant, they're afraid of criticism. You have to just be able to get yourself out there and not let anybody, tell you that you're not. You can let people correct your story by saying, I don't get it, but don't let people say, oh, that's horrible. You can't, that's a bad story. Don't tell it.
Well, actually, one of my favorite playwrights of the 20th century, Samuel Beckett, I think, he summed it up very nicely. He said, fail, try again, fail better. Right? You should never be afraid of failing. You should never be afraid that what you do won't work. But then, once you've done it, you learn from it and don't make the same mistakes again.
Right? Yeah, that's a great piece of advice. And again, now you're going with the publishing house for the next book instead of doing it yourself. What prompted you to do that?
Well, there are several problems with self-publishing. One of them is that while there are a lot of reviewers who will review print books no matter what their source, there are also a lot of reviewers who will only review traditionally published books. Okay. They won't review self-published books. So I found that was a barrier that could only be overcome by publishing. Traditionally. There's also the issue of getting books in bookstores. It's very difficult to get a self-published book into bookstores, whereas with a more traditional publishing route, it's much easier. And that's important because bookstores are still a primary source of books for a lot of readers. A lot of them will, buy through Amazon, and that's fine. I've got my books listed there. But a lot of us, and I'm one of them too, I must admit, just like browsing through a bookstore to see what we can find.
Yep.
So again, that's a barrier that could only be overcome by finding a traditional publisher. And I'll be honest with you, I mean, there is still, and you interview a lot of writers, so you probably have come across this before, there is still a stigma to self-publishing. There still is, a lot of people still feel that that if you're self-published, it's because you're a loser because you couldn't get a proper publishing deal.
Right. No,
and that's, I have to admit that part of the reason why a lot of people believe that is because, frankly, there are a lot of bad self-published books. Mm-hmm. And I don't just mean poorly written, but I mean, just not well edited. Right? So you read a book that's self-published and it's had, a lot of spelling and grammatical errors, and you think, oh, well, this reflects badly on all self-published books, unfortunately.
Yep.
So, again, getting published in a traditional way by a publisher is a way of saying to the world, no, my writing is actually good enough. Right. And that's, psychologically, that's very, very important.
Yep, and I think that your point about editing, whether you're especially if you're self-published, most of the authors that I have spoken to do have an editor that works with them. Sometimes it's a family member, but it's almost always somebody, I think I've only had one that said she edited her book herself. And I think that's the part that a lot of people may scrimp on or not think that they need, and you need a non-partial person to read your book and to edit the parts that are maybe a little unclear, or you think you said it one way and it came across as something else. And then of course there's the whole copy editing thing, just to make sure that you have your grammar and your sentence structure and everything, have all your P's and Q's in the right format.
And frankly, spelling. I mean,
yeah,
we live in an age of spell check. There is no excuse for misspelled words anymore. And yet, you can find them in self-published books.
Yep. And then when the reviewers find them, I had a book that I had thought I had very thoroughly edited, and I put it up on Amazon, and some people bought it, and one person said, "This book is horrible. The grammar in it is terrible." And I'm like, "Did you read the same book that I put up there?" So I was a little, taken aback that they thought there was bad grammar and bad punctuation, because it had been edited by myself and by two outside people, actually. So it's something you've got to stay on top of your game, or the reviewers are going to they'll crush you, right from the get-go, because there is too much. There's a little too much garbage, especially because it's so easy to create an ebook. And part of the reason of this author series is because I want you guys with good books to get out there and get known, so people realize that, no, it's not all garbage. There's some really, really good writing up there.
I have worked closely with editors on particularly the short stories, appeared in anthologies, and I have to say, we may disagree on points of grammar, but oftentimes they would point out either an issue of character or just a plot hole that my attention was on other things when I wrote that part of the story, and it just didn't occur to me. So I am now very much a fan of good editors. Now, of course, there are editors who will try to actually reshape your story into a different format because they think that's the better story to tell. You do have to be strong enough, I guess, to know that know the story you want to tell, and if somebody is trying to get you to tell something different, to ultimately walk away if you can't get that person to agree with it. But overall, I still maintain, at least my experience with editors has been very positive, and I think they're a very important part of the publishing process.
Yeah, and that's just something that I think our listeners need to hear, because, some of them want to cut corners or whatever, and they just they're impatient, and they just don't think it's necessary. So,
or they're afraid that the editor is going to kill their baby, right?
Right.
But the editor is actually, or at least good editors who are on the same page as the author, helps make the baby more beautiful.
That's nice. I like that. All right. And then as far as cover design and things, did you get those done yourself? Did you do those yourself, or did you find someone else to do them?
Well, I for somebody who actually has rotating cartoons on his website, I must admit that I'm a horrible, horrible artist.
Okay.
So I can't execute myself, but I have to admit, for all three of the alternate reality news service books, I designed the cover. So I gave the publishers, well, in the first two cases, I gave the publishers very specific, stick figure drawings of exactly what I wanted on the cover. And they actually executed them. I'm so happy with those covers. For the most recent book I found on Twitter, actually, I connected with an artist who does covers for a very reasonable price, and again, gave him the basic design, and again, was just absolutely delighted with what he came up with. So, so far, I've been fortunate. Now, with Elsewhen Press, the publisher of the novel, I sent them a half a dozen different cover designs, and their response was, we have professionals for that. So I don't know what's going to happen with that. One of the advantages of course, self-publishing is that you have complete control over these things, once you get a publisher, a more traditional publisher, you have input, but control not so much.
Yep, and that's because they, to their credit, they have tested certain elements on covers and should know how to create an eye-catching cover that will draw people to your book. But sometimes it just doesn't go along with what the author thinks should be on the cover.
Well, there are two ways of responding to that. The first is that because they're all doing the same testing and they're all getting more or less the same results, I find that a lot of commercial book covers look the same.
Yep.
Which means that it's harder for them to stand out than it is easier, right?
Yep.
So there's that problem. But there's also the problem of representation. Like the thing about the covers of the books I've published so far is that they actually reflect the content of the books, right? Whereas with a lot of commercial covers, they're kind of generic and they don't actually tell you anything about what the book is like or about. And part of that, I think, is because a lot of cover artists don't actually read the books, so they don't really know. They've just given some design ideas by the publisher, and they execute them to the best of their ability, but they don't really capture anything about the books, and that should be a concern of authors.
Yeah, that should be. And to be fair, the graphic artists don't really have time to read every single book they have to design a cover for, but they should be in contact with the author to be able to make the book cover be more representative of what's inside the book.
Or the publishers should be giving them less generic assignments. Right?
Yeah, they should be more specific.
Ultimately, the publisher has read the book and should be responsible for making sure that the cover represents the book.
Absolutely agree with you on that one. Let's see.
But let me just say, just so that I don't give the wrong impression.
Okay.
I found Elsewhen Press on Twitter. That they just I came across them as I was looking through it, and just kind of almost on a whim decided to submit my book to them.
Okay.
The first response I got from them was, "We've looked at some of your bios on the internet, and you look bonkers." Bonkers in all capital letters. Just the kind of person we're looking for. Send us the first 3 chapters.
Nice.
So I sent them the first 3 chapters, and their response almost immediately to that was, "Ooh, you hooked me within the first 2 sentences. Send us the entire novel."
Awesome.
Okay. So, they've been just, they've just been incredibly supportive. They're just wonderful, wonderful people.
Well, and I think they sound like they're probably one of the smaller publishing houses. And one of the nice things about the onslaught of self-publishing and publishing on the internet and all the new technology and everything is that you do have, legitimate publishing houses that are not the big, huge mammoth ones, that are more tailored toward specific types of writing and specific types of books, and they can do that very well. They can handle, like you said, they were looking for people who were bonkers and that wrote interesting things that, may not be all that mainstream. And that's something that they can specialize in, and they can run with you. And when they call bookstores or whatever, the bookstores know what kind of books they're going to get from these guys.
Absolutely. They're actually very small press and that deal specifically with science fiction. And they're British, which means 2 things. One, I've had a lot of people over the years tell me that I have a British sense of humor.
Oh, no, that's dangerous.
And that's a market that I should be going for. So the fact that it was a British publisher is actually quite good, right? And the other thing is, I've completely forgotten.
You remember in a minute or 2, or when we're off.
Or we'll just go on to something else that's more interesting. Old man brain. It's happening to me.
Now, with your current website, you sell your books from your website. Are you continuing on with the satirical essays that go on the website itself?
Oh, yeah. The website is still the main project. And I should also mention that next year I probably will have 2 new alternate reality news service books out, all being well. And I will self-publish them again.
Okay.
Even though I have now a legitimate publisher, the control I get over self-publishing is still important for that series of books.
Okay.
I'm also writing the shorts, will continue to write the short stories, and probably will have another novel or 2 down the road. And we'll continue to try and find legitimate publishers for those. But it's not, to me, it's not an either-or situation. Both have advantages for different projects that make both attractive to me on an ongoing basis.
That's a good point. I like that. For your really out there stuff, you like to have more control and don't want a publisher telling you have to change it. And then for your still bonkers but more mainstream type stuff, you can go with a publisher that appreciates it. And if these guys do a great job for you, you may have a long relationship with them.
Oh, I hope to, definitely. And of course, if Tor.com or if Tor or one of the major science fiction publishers in the States said, we'd like to take over publishing of all your self-published novels, well,
they can have them.
Yeah, I probably wouldn't say no, but since I don't see that on the horizon, this is the plan for now. Right.
And how much do you use social media to, now you've already mentioned a couple times that you found a cover designer and you found the publisher via Twitter. How much of your time is spent on social media?
Well, as you and probably your listeners know, it can be a huge time suck. You could spend all day on social media if you weren't careful.
Right.
I try to limit myself to an hour or 2 internet communications. That includes Twitter. I'm also on Facebook. I'm also on Goodreads. I'm also on LinkedIn. And I'm on a social network called My Outer Space.
Okay.
It's specifically for science fiction artists, writers, directors, producers of science fiction material. And it was started by William Shatner, of all people.
Oh, nice.
So I could, and of course I include email in that, so I could be spending a lot of time on that. And I've lost sight of your question.
Okay, it was how do you use social media in addition to how much time do you spend on it?
Well, the important thing about networking, as my web goddess just reminded me, is that it's about the networking. It's about connecting with other people, right? Mm-hmm. On Twitter, I do a lot of retweeting. When I'm on Facebook, I try to reply to posts that my friends have made. I'm hearing my feedback. I'm hearing my voice again.
Oh, I'm sorry. I haven't moved anything.
Maybe I'm just talking more voluminously now.
I guess.
So the important thing is not just to post information about your latest book. I find that a lot of authors, I try to connect to a lot of other writers, and I find a lot of writers use it only as a one-way medium to talk about their writing. And unfortunately, when you've got, 100, 200, 300 writers that you're following, and they're all trying to sell your books, sell you their books, that really becomes dull very quickly. Mm-hmm. It really does tend to pale. One of the things when my web goddess convinced me to get on Twitter, one of the things that I decided was if I was going to do it, I was going to try and do a lot of original writing for it. Mm-hmm. And I actually approached Twitter as another creative outlet, an outlet for my creativity.
Okay.
At the moment, I've got special themed months where every day I will post a new tweet on the theme of the month. Last month, for instance, was false facts about the War of 1812. because the War of 1812 has been promoted a lot here in Canada because we won, we beat the Americans.
Okay.
And I just thought that kind of warlike jingoism is so out of step with the Canada I grew up in anyway.
Right.
I wanted to make fun of that. I do a lot of puns on the internet, on Twitter in particular, which let's say have a mixed response.
Yeah.
Not everybody likes puns. There was one month where I do a lot of absurd stuff too. There was one month where every tweet of that month had the phrase "coughing up a rhino" in it. So, things like "in space, no one can hear you cough up a rhino."
Oh, nice.
Stuff like that, right? Just so that
it's random.
There's more than I do more than self-promotion, right? And that's very important because it makes people actually want to follow me.
Yep.
So that when I do the self-promotion, there are actually a lot of followers there. Right?
Yeah, you want to actually engage your people instead of just preaching out to them.
Exactly. And I get a lot of stuff retweeted because of that, which I don't think happens I don't think would happen if I was just, self-promoting my books all the time. So I think that's a very important point for writers to consider when they're approaching social media.
Now, how does your typical writing day go?
I do not have one. I do not have any sort of schedule or any sort of timetable. I have been known to write while I was waiting in doctor's offices, or I can develop ideas on the subway. I might not write the whole piece, but I'll write down, in point form, the notes about what I want to write. When I get back at my computer, I have been known to write for 12 hours a day. I sometimes write for, 20 minutes a day. Depends on what's coming, and if nothing is coming, I'm not one of those writers who, forces himself to sit behind the computer for 6 hours and, write garbage. If it's not coming, there are so many background things that I have to do just to maintain my pace, because I update my website on a weekly basis with at least 3 new pieces of writing. And that might not sound like a lot, but over a course of a year or 5 years, or now almost 10 years.
That's a lot.
It's huge. It's huge. I've literally written enough for, in 10 years, I think I've literally written enough to make 14 different books. Well over 1 million words.
That's nice.
So, I have to do things like I read 2 newspapers a day. I have to read constantly to develop ideas. I have to take care of the email and social media and all of that stuff. So, when the writing is not coming, do interviews. When the writing is not coming, there are a lot of writing-related activities. You could consider them professional activities that I still have to do. So even when I'm not, when it's not there and the creativity is just not coming, I can still feel like I've had a full writer's day by doing those things. I should also mention, because I do science fiction, because I write science fiction, I go to a lot of science fiction conventions. I just came back this weekend from Polaris, which is a convention in my hometown of Toronto. Those are awesome.
Well, yeah, tons of new ideas flow from just walking around one of those.
Oh, talking to people, being on panels. They're an awesome marketing tool, but they're also just really fun to attend as well. So if you have any listeners who are science fiction writers, they should really consider. It's also a really good way of getting connected to the science fiction community. They should consider, how often they can go out to these things. There are 3 in Toronto.
Okay.
And every year, and I've also tried to get out to at least 3 or 4 others outside of the city. depending upon what my finances are like. Hopefully, if all things work well, I will be in England for the launch of my novel next year, which is, I'll be there for a science fiction convention, but also because I've always just wanted to go there, so this would be thrilling. Yes, I've been watching Doctor Who since I was like this high, which of course your listeners can't see, but it's not very high.
Yeah, Doctor Who has been out there for quite a long time.
Oh, almost 50 years. So yeah, and I'm a big fan of British culture. One of the panels I was on at Polaris was actually about Monty Python's Flying Circus, which I'm just a huge fan of. So I've been sucking up all this British culture for so long. It's almost like going home, even though I've never actually been there before.
That's really cool. You're going to the home you never knew you had.
Exactly.
So, all right. Well, I want to thank you so much for joining me this afternoon. And I know you said the name of your website earlier in the podcast, but it's also going to be something that I think folks need spelled out. A lot of our people listen on podcatchers and not necessarily go find us on our website. Okay. So if you can tell us where your books are, where your writing is.
Absolutely. My website is called Les Pages aux Folles, and it can be found at www.lespagesaux.ca. It's a Canadian domain name, not .com.
Okay.
In print, my books are Alternate Reality Ain't What It Used to Be, What Were Once Miracles Are Now Children's Toys, and Luna for the Loonies. And those books can all be found on Amazon. Alternate Reality Ain't What It Used to Be and Luna for the Loonies are also available in e-versions as well as print.
Okay.
If you are interested in the Van der Waal short stories, there is one in an awesome anthology called Unconventional. It's about what happens behind the scenes at science fiction conventions.
Oh, wow.
And it's just, I was so proud to be in that anthology. It's just so much fun. And again, I'm pretty sure you can get that on Amazon.com. And people should definitely check back at my website on a regular basis, and there'll be announcements of when new stories are available in anthologies, and of course when the novel comes out.
Okay, and what's your Twitter?
I'm Arns Proprietor, ARNSPROPRIETOR.
Okay.
I'm the proprietor of the Alternate Reality News Service. That's on the cover of the most recent couple of books. Okay, nice.
All right. And as always, all of our listeners, you can find our podcasts at BookGoodies.com, and you can just search for Ira, and I think he's the only Ira I'm interviewing, so you'll be able to find his podcast rather easily. And feel free to leave us comments and suggestions. And if you want to suggest a topic you'd like to hear us cover, or if you want to volunteer to be on one of our podcasts, you can use our contact form at the top of the page. And we also have a link at the top of the page for authors to submit to tell us about your book. So you can list your books right on our website. And as always, we like to thank Geekcast.fm, GEEKCAST.fm, where for hosting all of our podcasts. And they also have a large variety of marketing and internet marketing podcasts that you can go over and enjoy as well. And for BookGoodies on Twitter, it's just twitter.com/BookGoodies. And on Facebook, facebook.com/BookGoodies. And you can find me at DeborahCarney.com or on Twitter at Loxley, LOXLY. I want to thank everyone for listening. Thank you, Ira, again for joining us. And get writing and have a great day.